Hi. So I'm actually Shannon Keen. I didn't tell Michelle how to pronounce my last name, so do not worry about that, Michelle. But yes, it's pronounced Keen. I suspect something happened at Ellis Island or my family became more Americanized as they moved to America. I'm a senior cloud advocate at Microsoft. So within my role, I do a lot of community outreach for enterprise platforms and tools. And our big focus right now is Azure VMware Solution. So the enterprise platforms and tools team is part of the broader methods and practices team. If anybody's familiar with Donovan Brown, I report up through him. And so he's leading a number of advocates, and we're trying to do a lot of broad community outreach. So anything from blogs to video to code, meetups, speaking events, expert talks like this. And as a result, it's a fun, I guess it's kind of a fun role in the sense that I get a chance to talk to a lot of folks in a lot of different areas and try and help demystify the whole process of digital transformation. So you can find me active on social media via, say, Twitter and LinkedIn. I tend to post a lot of good content there. I also encourage you to reach out via email if you've got any questions or follow-up questions, surrounding this talk as it stands. Then I'll turn it over to Dwayne.
Thank you very much, Shannon. So yes, I'm joining Shannon today. My name is Dwayne Natwick. I am a senior cloud training architect at Opsagility and Skill Me Up. I am also a Microsoft Azure awarded MVP as of the first of this month, my first MVP award. So very proud and excited to receive that. And I've been in technology for over 30 years and gravitated to having an affinity to Azure, of which I have gathered now. Need to update this slide. I'm actually, I think, up to 13 Azure or Microsoft 365 certifications, and I'm also an MCT regional lead for the Certified Trainer Program. And again, I'm also active on the social media links that are on this slide. So let's talk about some Azure VMware solutions. How about it, Shannon?
Sure. Yeah, you got it. All right, so this will be the flow. We'll go through the introduction and background. We'll talk a little bit about the deployment process. We'll go through the management pane. I'll then touch on the network architecture. We'll walk through a migration scenario and what to factor in there. And then we'll touch on storage. Dwayne will definitely go deep on security and compliance. It's very much so his background, Mr. CISSP. And then I've got a few demos, and I'll walk through those demos along with resources at the tail end of this. So we'll start with the introduction and background. So Azure VMware Solution, it delivers a comprehensive VMware environment as a service, which allows customers to run native VMware workloads in Azure, which kind of blows my mind if you think about it. You can run VMware workloads in Azure. It's definitely a new day in cloud computing at Microsoft. So AVS, and I'll call it AVS probably throughout the course of our talk. That's the truncated version. It breaks the paradigm in Azure. So customers can now migrate VMs directly from on-premises to Azure, landing on bare metal, purpose-built, hyper-converged dedicated nodes to run your VMware VMs in Azure exactly as they run today in the hypervisor you both know and love, VMware. P.S. I also love VMware. It's an awesome platform. Customers can now see...
Hey, Shannon. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Your slide, for some reason, lagged, and we weren't seeing that slide. So we're seeing it now, it appears. So.
Oh, what a bummer. What a bummer. It's all right. We unfortunately have technical difficulties, and we work in technology, right?
Exactly.
So anyway, so as you can see here, we've got the on-premises VMware vSphere stack, and it's talking to Microsoft Azure. I don't know if anybody out there has ever thought about this, right? VMware and Microsoft were direct competitors for a number of years. They still are in many respects, but we're at that point where we've formed a great new relationship with VMware, and you're now able to run VMware on Azure. Let's see here. There we go. Okay, it's catching up. So The AVS solution delivers VMware-based private clouds in Azure. So the private clouds are built from clusters of dedicated bare metal hosts, and they're deployed and managed through the Azure portal. So clusters and private clouds are provisioned with VMware vSphere, vCenter, vSAN, and NSX software out the gate. AVS private cloud hardware and software deployments are fully integrated and automated in Azure as well. One thing to note is this is not our first time building a purpose-built solution for Azure services. Along with AVS, we offer bare metal solutions for SAP, Cray, and NetApp. Using those go ahead.
Yeah, so Shannon, taking that into account around these different purpose-built solutions that are available within Azure, would you say that having this AVS solution is now creating kind of a stepping stone for a lot of MSPs and enterprises to be able to begin to rehost their applications in Azure and
Correct.
begin to take that very tough first step that feels like a chasm of a leap into the Azure environment?
Yes, so I definitely think so. I think we've often met developers where they are. We're finally meeting IT pros where they are. We've listened to feedback. We've realized that there's a learning curve involved with Azure. And so this is an opportunity for you to jump on this boat that we're marching towards Azure, and we'll give you a platform that you know and love. So that starts to help. My suspicion would be it starts to help that anxiety. It feels less anxious and it feels a little bit more friendly related to that digital transformation. So I think folks should be relatively familiar with this whole notion of cloud migration strategies. So there are 4 distinct pillars. There's rehost, refactor, re-architect, and rebuild. I often joke it's the 4 R's. So it's not really straightforward to move from left to right, unfortunately. So our goal has always been to provide as many options as possible. This helps ease the digital transformation needs of each company. So if you see here on the far left, it used to be IaaS. Now we've got Azure VMware Solution. So the solution itself sits in the Azure dedicated side of our engineering house, which gives our customers a lot of flexibility and opportunity to think about positioning AVS as kind of that version 1.0 of your digital transformation. With AVS, your VMware workloads fall into 2 areas you can configure, manage, and control. So within vCenter outright, by using vCenter, the vSphere client, vRealize operations, NSX Manager, Power CLI, API calls, right? Or you can also think about hitting the Azure Service Fabric with the RESTful ARM APIs. Each VM shows up as a vCenter VM, and it also shows up as a VM object in Azure with a network card, disks, etc. So dependent upon your operations style, this offers a wide range of possibility related to scale, automation, and fast provisioning of VMs within your environment. You can also take on Azure's entire range of services at a time that's more convenient for you by embracing AVS for your environment, right? A lot of folks have that analysis by paralysis. It's an unknown. They have to take on IaaS out of the gate. Now you don't have to. You can take on Azure at a time that makes the most sense. So your company gets to keep using existing VMware investments, skills, and tools to support the range of business applications on a day-to-day basis with vSphere, vSAN, and vCenter. Another key aspect I want to bring up is you gain an opportunity to modernize your workloads by integrating with Azure native services like Azure Active Directory, Azure Security Center, Azure Sentinel, any of the AI components that we offer inside of Azure, as well as all of the deep analytics. This unlocks new and intelligent features just by making use of our bare metal offering on Azure. So we offer some compelling pricing benefits as well related to Windows Server and SQL Server. And finally, you can be rest assured that the Azure VMware Solution is a first-party offering backed by VMware.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, the AVS solution actually is running on the dedicated host service rather than the shared services within Azure.
Correct.
So it is an isolated build as well. So for business critical line of business applications, it's creating that isolated environment, much like the private network is going to do.
Correct. And that tends to start making folks feel less like it's a shared environment,
Yep.
right? Most of our service offerings are shared environments, but we do have these independent environments that are sitting on bare metal offerings, right?
Yep.
So it's to help those advanced migration techniques into Azure, and it's to help utilize something that's lower to the actual hardware versus having to go through the abstractions that we have related to the different levels of compute, storage, and networking, right? So it's not to say you can't get the same like for like if you go that route. This just gives folks an opportunity to sit a little lower to their own dedicated nodes so that they can kind of start to control what that looks like.
Perfect.
Let's see here. So in this diagram, you can see the adjacency between private clouds and VNets in Azure, Azure services, and on-premises environments. So network access from private clouds to Azure services or VNets provides an SLA-driven integration of Azure endpoints, right? So private cloud access from on-premises environments uses ExpressRoute Global Reach for a private and secure connection. Then once you've deployed AVS, you gain access to all the feature-rich offerings within the portal. I often joke it's kind of like achievement unlocked if you're an Xbox player, and I hope all of you are because it's a Microsoft gaming platform. So let's step through some of the new and differentiated features because we did have a version 1.0 of our AVS offering. We're in the middle of a public preview right now, and I believe it's West Europe and East US. Those are the two regions right now that are lit up and live for the public preview. So with the version 2.0, what we have is we have a direct cloud partnership between Microsoft and VMware. So the solution is entirely designed, built, and supported by Microsoft and then endorsed by VMware. So architecturally, the solutions are consistent with the VMware technology stack that's running on Azure dedicated infrastructure. So that's kind of a nice win. Prior to, we had a solution that was leaning on a vendor called Cloud Simple. It's not to say that it was a bad kind of first go of it. No, I think we learned a lot. And as a result, we wanted to roll it more into the Azure portal. So there's a seamless Azure experience and native integration that should shed some light where everything you need to configure happens in the same Azure portal you would use for any Azure service like a VM, a load balancer, or a web app, right? You don't have to go into a separate portal. Prior to, you did, unfortunately, but everything's now in the same portal. You only have to go to one spot, or you could go into your vCenter environment. So companies, go ahead.
I'm sorry. So something about that, I know that the other cloud that starts with A has a similar VMware type solution, but I know that there is a large investment that they require in on-premise hardware to be able to stand it up. It's not just a move into their cloud to have their VMware solution.
Sure.
Is that another differentiator that Microsoft has in moving to Azure, in that it utilizes the existing hardware, VMware hardware and build that you have in place and just extends that?
Pretty much, yes. So you can have a vCenter environment or a vSphere environment that's 5.0 or newer, related to on-prem, right? If you're running a lower version of vCenter or vSphere, you may want to consider upgrading, but most companies are at least at 5.0 or newer, hopefully newer, because I think 5.0 hit end of life a number of years back. So the beauty, though, is that you don't have to think about upgrading your vCenter environment as well. You could leave it on 5.0 and utilize what's living in Microsoft. So the Microsoft Azure, what gets deployed is 3 nodes. That's the bare minimum. And then from there, you get all the latest and greatest hardware and software updates. So you don't have to worry about the fact that usually updates when you're living in the on-prem land, you have to factor in maintenance, cost, upgrade, etc. Well, that's all taken care of you by way of Microsoft. And so all you have to think about is kind of extending your data center so it could potentially live in Azure, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's very much so one of those things. So companies can make use of the Azure Hybrid Use benefit for licensing costs with Windows and SQL Server, which reduces the operational CapEx costs. So you don't have to pay for that Windows license while that VM's running 24/7, 365. Then if you're still running Windows Server 2008, 2008 R2, or SQL Server 2008 or SQL Server 2008 R2, you're eligible for the no-cost extended security updates in Azure by using AVS. So patching your environment becomes more cost-effective by migrating these VMs into Azure using AVS. Kind of a cool win if you think about it. If there are issues with your AVS environment and you need to escalate with support, you only have to call Microsoft. So that's an awesome win. You don't have to call Microsoft and VMware. Microsoft coordinates with VMware to resolve any issues that you may face within your AVS environment. So the AVS environment supports the latest VMware technology updates. So this also helps you kind of continue forward related to the lifecycle management ecosystem between kind of Microsoft and VMware. We also have Hybrid Cloud Exchange. So that's HCX. The Enterprise Edition is available, and this helps you migrate those VMs from on-premises into Azure using vMotion. I think if anybody's a VMware admin, you know how much you love vMotion. Well, wouldn't it be cool if you could vMotion your VMs from on-premises into Azure using vMotion? You can. You do need HCX Enterprise. Microsoft's AVS nodes sit on the fast and highly performant kind of bare metal infrastructure. So that's really cool. They're dedicated to you. Only your company gets access to those hosts. Then there's a unified licensing and consumption component as well. You only have to go to one spot. Whereas, if you're doing it on your own, you have to go into VMware. You have to also lean on your licensing agreement. You've got to go to two different spots. It's one spot related to how you track your budget. From there, we've got a simplified NSX interface using AVS version 2.0. So these are some of the cool new differentiated features that, if you adopt the solution now, you'll adopt it during the public preview, and then this will be kind of the de facto standard going forward.
So that brings up another question
Sure.
around the licensing.
Sure.
So I know, VMware has their point system that everything's licensed on, which I think you need to have like a algebraic degree and mathematics degree of some sort to try and figure those out sometimes.
Right.
How is that all much more intrinsic to the Azure consumption model, or does it work a lot similar to other third-party services in the Azure marketplace where you have to essentially have your third-party licensing with VMware in place and utilize the point, and still are consuming based on the point system?
Sure. So the way it works is you have to have 3 nodes minimum to run this, right? So that's a hardware cost. On top of it, you're going to get vSphere licensing included. So vSphere, vCenter, et cetera. And NSX Manager comes as part of it as well. So that's baked into the cost. On top of it, if you use something like Site Recovery Manager or you use vRealize, you can bring those licenses into the mix. So you can think about, you still have to manage that license agreement outside of Microsoft, but you have capacity to bring your own license into Microsoft. And that's some of the ways you could think about positioning DR. And then it's the actual server licensing, which is why, you'd have to think about some of the hybrid use benefit components, as well as getting those extended security updates. So that's kind of the full-blown pricing model. And then, deploying it in Azure, all you have to do is just make sure that the nodes never go below 3, and you actually can't go below 3, right? But you can scale up and then you can scale back based upon demand.
Mm-hmm. Great.
So let's see here. So, this slide just showcases it's the familiar VMware tools and technology. You don't have to think about learning IaaS out the gate. It's a really cool reality. And then it's that seamless Azure experience inside of the portal related to building this out. So it's as simple as filling in these 4 of these fields right here, clicking review and create, and then creating. I don't know about you, but I mean, vCenter upgrades before vSphere upgrades would take months. This takes minutes. It's kind of a cool reality.
Right, and you're automatically going into the most recent version of vSphere going into the AVS. So like you said, if you're
Correct.
still running an old version of VMware like 5.0, you actually are upgrading yourself when you move into Azure.
Correct.
And then as you deprecate workloads in your own private data center, you're still running VMware, but you're running it at the most recent VMware version.
Correct. Yep. And I mean, it's a hair behind what's the most recent, because technically 7.0 is the most recent version of
Right.
vSphere.
Yep.
So we're one version behind, and that's because 7.0 is being tested and validated right now. But we're also still kind of in a weird public preview state. So I'll talk a little bit about what to expect if you think about adopting this for your company. So, we've got this concept here of AVS living on Azure for the well-managed infrastructure, which includes high availability, DR, and backup. Plus, once you get into Azure, you can also plug into the rich third-party ecosystem, the Azure Marketplace. You could help, that could help you augment maybe what you're already doing. It could also bridge any gaps. Basically, what I try and talk about is AVS is just another tool in your tool belt. It's another option in the event it's something that makes sense for your company. So if the timing's right and you're ready to make that hop, you really do unlock the greater potential by moving everything into Azure. So these are the software and hardware packages that you wind up getting at the point of reaching GA. So as I had talked about, 7.0 is out and there are future updates and patches, right? Those software bundles are being validated, and once they're validated, they will be pushed out based upon a maintenance schedule. So, but know that if 6.7 update 3 is newer than what you're using, but you're still within 5.0 or newer, you get capacity to lean on the newer versions of vSphere by way of making use of AVS. And then so billing uses that monthly pay-as-you-go model. You could also consider using reserved instances, either the 1 or the 3-year, but those prices are really for once the solution reaches GA. So keep that in mind. And then the service itself requires a minimum of the AV36 nodes, 3 of those, and then you can add additional nodes as required. So this kind of calls it all out here. And you could think about some of the raw capacity you get from a storage perspective, some of the networking as well. So it's a pretty decent and robust solution.
Are there any hardware requirements on premises other than just running vSphere 5.0?
No,
I know we're going to be talking a little bit about the architecture of things, but
sure.
Yeah, are there any specific you have to have this amount of hardware running to connect to it? Or it's just you have vSphere 5.0 or higher, you're ready to go?
Pretty much that's the case. If you want to use HCX Enterprise, you have to run some components that live in your on-premises environments, and there's some unification that has to happen between on-premises and Azure, but you don't have to think about buying new hosts to be able to talk to Azure outright.
So you'd have to stand up that, if you're going to use that HCX and those benefits of HCX in Azure, you actually have to be running HCX Enterprise in your current environment.
Correct, and it's as simple as spinning up another VM in the mix. Think of it like an NVA is probably the best way to describe it if folks are familiar. So it's an extra VM that lives inside your vCenter environment on-prem, and then you have to think about some of the networking requirements related to exposing what you've got on-prem into Azure, and I'll talk about that as well. But those are some of the things just to be conscious of. But you don't have to buy a whole dedicated host to run this, right? What you have right now, so long as it's vSphere 5.0 or newer, you'll be able to plug into AVS in Azure. So these are some of the common use cases or scenarios that we tend to see. So first and foremost, data center expansion, reduction, or retirement. So you can gain additional capacity when you reach the limits of your existing data center thresholds. It's also easy for you to add needed capacity in the cloud and eliminate any headaches of managing hardware refreshes. I think a lot of customers are starting to realize they want to get out of that game. I don't blame you. It's a headache. So it's also easy for you to add that needed capacity kind of on demand, right? So customers also get a chance to reduce the risk and cost of cloud migrations by using AVS compared to that sometimes time-consuming conversions going into IaaS or re-architecture potentially if you're going to think about using some PaaS-based solutions. And right now, everything's living on a server, right? If you're using familiar VMware tools and skills to accelerate cloud migrations, that also tends to help as well. So it really hits home that the first piece of this, the most common scenario, is a data center expansion, reduction, or retirement. From there, you could think about disaster recovery or business continuity. So customers could lean on AVS to establish remote access to data and apps in Azure. So with those high bandwidth connections using ExpressRoute, you can quickly recover from any incident, right? So that low latency network gives you the fast response time, and users start to expect that, right? And so now you've got capacity to think about leaning on AVS in Azure from a DR perspective. From there, there's a speed and simplification of migration, right? You don't need to convert those VMs to IaaS. You can quickly migrate those VMs with vMotion using HCX. So that was probably the coolest piece to realize as I started leaning on this solution and joining my current team, trying to talk about this solution related to our enterprise kind of platforms and tools customers. So even though AVS is a lift and shift model, you can make use of, say, Azure Active Directory, advanced analytics, et cetera, to start moving toward application modernization as well. So once you get closer to the ARM APIs, you really start to be able to take on Azure at a time that makes sense to you. Let's go through the deployment steps. So these are the high-level steps when you deploy a software-defined data center or SDDC in Azure. You'll first deploy the AVS private cloud. From there, you'll create a VNet for the environment or a virtualized network. Not sure how familiar folks are. If I use something, feel free to put something in the chat if you need me to go into a little bit more. But VNet's what we call it in Azure. It's a virtualized network. Afterwards, you create a jump box in Azure. It could also be a bastion to access the AVS environment from on-premises. You'll then create a gateway subnet in the VNet. You'll deploy a VNet gateway and provide an auth key to connect your on-premises environment into Azure using ExpressRoute. So finally, you'll connect your ExpressRoute to the VNet gateway. It's pretty straightforward, at least on the sides of getting this ready to go to be connected into Azure. And then you'll connect the VMware environment on premises into the AVS environment. So when you deploy AVS inside of Azure, you get an ExpressRoute as part of that, right? And then you can link it into an existing ExpressRoute. And then you have that full-blown private connectivity between on-premises and Azure. So you'll RDP to the jump box you created during provisioning of the AVS service, or you'll, the Azure Bastion service. You'll connect to the NSXT, then you'll enable the global reach, because that's a big component here in order for AVS to understand all of the routing into your on-premises world. You need that global reach enabled, and you'll need a dedicated ExpressRoute on the customer side, as well as in the AVS realm, in order for that full-blown connectivity to work. And finally, you'll configure the on-premises environment with VMware Identity Manager, which is the Identify as a Service offering from VMware that provides the single sign-on capabilities and user-based controls within a vSphere environment. Of course, this is an oversimplification, but these are the basic steps that you'll take. There's some configurations that have to happen on-prem and some configurations that have to happen in Azure.
Now, does that Identity Manager integrate into any of the Azure AD RBAC principles?
It can. Yep, it definitely can. So I am not as familiar with all of the nuances of it, but I know that we've got customers who use Azure Active Directory in conjunction with the VMware Identity Manager.
I'm going to imagine that it probably is integrated into local AD, and you probably need to set up AD Connect or something like that. Probably
correct. Sorry, yes.
To set that up, right?
Yeah, you definitely do. You need to
definitely need the Azure AD Connect. Yep.
Correct. Yes. So
not a direct tie-in between the VMware Identity Manager and Azure Active Directory yet. It's just
no. Yeah, because it's like traditional Active Directory is a little bit more robust and full, whereas Azure Active Directory is a little flat. So yeah, you'll have to stage Azure Active Directory Connect, and then you'll replicate your identities into Azure, and those will live in your Azure Active Directory tenant, and then that's how you kind of make use of the full-blown solution.
Gotcha.
So let's talk a little bit about the management pieces next. So the beauty of running VMware in Azure, your team will already be familiar with all of the VMware tools and technology, since it's just VMware on Azure, right? Using AVS allows you to create the operational consistency for admins, since you'll use the vSphere client to access your cluster and all VMs, and then you'll use NSXT Manager as well. So, access to vSphere, HCX, and NSXT are enabled during the private cloud deployment process in Azure, and the credentials are registered in Azure to connect to the private cluster hosts. There's an ability to easily scale the infrastructure to match business needs through the portal. So since it's also available and accessible in the portal, you can automate some of this based upon maybe demand, maybe there's something that's happening end of month reporting. You could expand those nodes for the duration of time that you need those additional nodes, and then you could actually reduce the nodes down to what's the minimum required, right? So the math is called at the bottom of the slide. There's a minimum of 3 nodes per cluster. You can't go lower than that. There's a maximum of 16 nodes in a vSphere cluster, and there's a maximum of 64 nodes in an Azure private cloud instance. And that's right now too. This service, like every other service in Azure, it's going to continue to evolve. So these numbers may change, but this is essentially what you would think about related to onboarding the solution right now. And then as the service reaches closer to GA.
Now, as far as that seamless management approach and everything, I know we have, Microsoft is pushing, the multi-cloud management with Azure Arc, and we have Microsoft has the Azure Sentinel and Azure Security Center, and how that ecosystem works with with log analytics and Azure Monitor. Is that tie-in available right now with the AVS, or is it something that's on the run path?
It is. So there's ways in which, so anything in Azure will generate Azure Monitor data by default. So once these VMs are migrated into Azure, you're going to get log data. And if you want to see that log data kind of in a more granular fashion, you can deploy a log analytics workspace and start to unpack what those logs look like. You'll also be able to think about fine-tuning some of those metrics, and you can create alerts if you don't want to move your existing on-premises monitoring solution into Azure. So you can think about leaning on Azure Monitor out the gate. You could enable Azure Security Center, and it would seem like an IaaS deployment, because again, it's another component of IaaS. It's IaaS-like. It's not quite IaaS, but it's IaaS-like. So the same onboarding scenarios would work related to Azure Security Center, Azure Sentinel, and log analytics, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so what you would want to do then is you would need to deploy the Azure monitoring agents and network watcher agents to the VMware on-premise environment as well to feed that data back into Azure as well.
Correct. Or you could, if you're going to be migrating it, you could also auto-enable the Azure policy components and have some of that get installed as those VMs get on too. So it just depends upon what your management style looks like. Do you want to have it automated? Do you want to pre-prepare? It's really, there's no right or wrong way to think about it, but you have flexibility, I guess, is the better way to think about it, right? You're not really stuck ever in any scenario, right? You can pre-provision, you can provision after the fact. You could also provision it manually once they're over in Azure too, right? There's a whole gambit of opportunity here related to what that looks like.
Yeah, it's comfort level and skill set, right? As you're skilling yourself up and getting more comfortable with the Azure environment, you may start to migrate more to the native tools of Azure and move away from some of those VMware vCenter tools in terms of that, as your comfort level, and your skills within your organization increase and evolve, so to speak.
Yes, completely agree. So I show this slide a lot, right? We often show the division of responsibility between Microsoft and customers related to IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. We don't really focus on the dedicated sides, although we're starting to change that. And I think what I would like folks to take away from this slide is that certain headaches are going to go away if you embrace AVS, right? You won't have to worry about firmware upgrades. You won't have to worry about host upgrades. You won't have to worry about software patches, upgrading software, right? All of that falls on Microsoft. So essentially, you, in theory, will have less headaches, right? You can focus on the cooler stuff. So lifecycle management of your servers as it stands, configuration management, the applications, the end-to-end architecture of what those look like, right? So Microsoft will handle the host maintenance and lifecycle management, as well as all the hardware and the portal configurations. The only thing to note is you have to eventually allow the maintenance to happen and the upgrades to happen. You just can't be more than one version behind what's current. And what's current right now is 6.7 update 3.
So this is an interesting slide from that standpoint in terms of the responsibility. You still have that responsibility, though, in your on-premise VMware environment, right?
Correct.
This would be if you're running all of your VMware workloads within the AVS solution. But you still, it's not that Microsoft is taking over responsibility of your vCenter and vSAN in your on-premise data center. It's strictly the responsibility on the Azure side.
Correct. Yeah. So if you embrace AVS, this is the lines of responsibility. This is where everything is kind of drawn out. If you don't take AVS on, obviously you're doing the full gambit. This would be all gray.
It's like taking on a SQL within Azure as a platform service, right?
Correct.
Microsoft will take all that on if you want to give it all to them, right?
Yep, exactly. And I mean, that's why I started believing in the cloud, right? I didn't like those middle of the night phone calls, my phone blowing up. That's all gone in theory. I mean, you're still gonna have to be on kind of the hook for your VMs, but that's fine. Like what I would hate is when like a storage array would just fail, right? For some reason, power supply would go out. And I worked for a couple of firms that didn't really believe in high availability until we had incidents like that. So the beauty is now you don't have to think about that because Microsoft will hold that responsibility for you.
That's nice, and I know it's same thing with, like I mentioned, the SQL database service. DBAs love the fact that they don't have to patch SQL servers anymore as well.
Yes.
And I'm sure that VMware admins will feel the same way.
Yeah, it's a little scary giving up some control. I think I definitely get that, right? But now you can go focus on taking on Azure, right? Because software-defined everything is our future. People are going to be less and less reliant upon somebody that knows, how to install a RAID card and a power supply. Now you're going to have to kind of retool that knowledge. It's not that goes away. You have to know it from like the conceptual layer. But now what becomes a more of a hot topic is how do you then innovate once we lean on big cloud providers like Microsoft Azure? So how could you think about helping your business out related to efficiency, agility, et cetera, right?
Yep.
So I'll talk a little bit about network architecture next. So the network interconnectivity between your Azure VMware solution and private clouds and the on-prem environments or virtual networks in Azure enables you to access and use your private cloud regardless of where you're trying to access that environment. There are two types of AVS private cloud interconnectivity. There's the basic interconnectivity, which enables you to manage and use your private cloud with only a single virtual network in Azure, and then full on-premises to private cloud interconnectivity, which extends the virtual network connectivity to also include interconnectivity between on-premises environments and AVS private clouds. So at a high level, this is just kind of that quick overview. The next couple of slides here will highlight it a little bit deeper. This is the first go at it. This is the basic interconnectivity. This is great if you're just rolling AVS into your environment. You don't necessarily need the AVS connectivity to on-prem just yet. So if you have the solution, you've got buy-in from management, this is a great first starter. That way you'll get familiar with how all of this works. And then as you think about onboarding ExpressRoute, this could be something that, you get yourself comfortable with all of the different nuances, and doesn't change too much, but you'll get more comfortable with going to the portal, how to access resources, what it looks like. So that would be basic interconnectivity. And then this is the full interconnectivity where you've got global reach configured and you've got an express route coming from on-premises. So this is how, the BGP routes from on-prem into Azure. And then that routes into the AVS private cloud, which you get an express route on that front. So it's an interesting solution in the sense that networking wise, you have to just factor in, the idea that these networks really shouldn't overlap, at least outright. I'll talk a little bit about why they could potentially overlap and what you'd have to enable. But, out the gate, you want to think about it in that sense of expanding your data center into Azure. When we have those conversations with customers, we say, let's build out a brand new site or block, and that'll be all your Azure resources. And then we'll be able to have that full interconnectivity. We also have one other version that is supported during POC. So it's a VPN. So it kind of builds on that basic interconnectivity, but it also allows you to access what's happening in Azure from on-prem. Now, this is supported during kind of POC, trying to get that express route. It's also supported as you onboard the solution. The thing that's not supported is HCX Enterprise over VPN is not supported. So that's why we try and have the conversation that this is really for that POC, trying to kick the tires, make sure this works right. You can stand up that site-to-site VPN. You could leave it, but eventually you're probably going to want to have an express route in place, and you're going to want to have the opportunity to enable it with global reach so that you have that full end-to-end sort of mesh networking between on-prem and Azure.
And that's no different than any of the other purpose-built services within
Correct.
Azure, like SAP. You're not going to run SAP over a site-to-site IPsec connection, you're gonna
Man, unless
you're gonna want to
dangerously,
have that dedicated connection, and then just in case, and have that gateway in play just in case failover is needed. But
Yep, exactly.
but yeah,
Exactly.
express route is always recommended if you're pushing large amounts of data.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. It just makes things easier from a migration path too. So speaking of migration, that was a good segue, Dwayne. It's almost like we planned this. About the migration path here. So, similar to other third-party tools, companies will have to assess their VMware environment. You can use Azure Migrate, you can use third-party tools. You just need to know what you've got, and you need to figure out, do we migrate everything? Do we start scrapping some of these workloads we didn't even know we had? From there, that helps you identify the workloads, and then it defines the migration approach. So, you can use HCX to do the migration. The one caveat here is the older versions you have on-prem, you aren't able to make use of the live migration. You have to think about bulk migration. But I mean, you still have HCX and in the mix here helping that migration path. And then that helps you identify the steps to full-blown production. So this really starts to help you plot as you take a look at what you have and figure out the ways in which to get it there. Now, from there, we definitely want to stress you'll want to do, POCs. You'll want to, create the private cloud. You'll want to move some VMs using the preferred migration type, right? You'll want to feel confident that the solution is exactly what you're looking for, so that testing and validation is key. And I'll talk a little bit later in this presentation about the ways in which to get to that point. And then from there, the at-scale migration and adoption, if you've got some savvy VMware admins, this should be pretty straightforward. However, we also have Microsoft Fast Track, and then we've got certified partners that are able to help as well. So if it becomes a hard deal and there's some stalling that's happening, we've got extra bodies that we can help throw at the problem, right? And I guess not really a problem, right? But just the idea of a migration path into Azure. So one of the cool things here is Azure Migrate now supports assessments for the Azure VMware Solution, which just provides you more options for customers to plan their migration path. So previously it was just, surrounding Windows and Linux servers. Now you've got web apps, you've got databases, and you've got AVS. And this really helps you plot out what the runtime will look like. It does require a little bit of lead time, so you'll deploy the appliance on-prem. You'll let it run. I recommend at least 2 weeks, if not a full-blown month, especially if you have a lot of cycles later in the month, like month-end reporting. So the solution supports up to 35,000 VMware servers, which sounds like a lot. I wonder if somebody's going to ever hit that point inside one Azure Migrate project, which is pretty cool. Seems endless, but I bet you there's going to be somebody out there that hits that limit, right? And then they're going to have to think about how could we add more.
Yep.
So this is the HCX slide. So, Hybrid Cloud Exchange is that tool that helps here, right? So the advanced gets deployed by default. Adding the enterprise is how you handle the migration path from on-prem into Azure. It's a quick support ticket. I think that's going to change as the service evolves and moves closer to GA. But right now, a lot of our customers that are in this stage of public preview, they're getting HCX Enterprise. So HCX can support large-scale bulk migrations of VMs. So if you're running that older version of vSphere 5.0, you'll have to do bulk migration. Or if you just wanted to get a bunch of VMs over during a weekend, that can be handled by HCX. It also supports any vSphere to vSphere migration pattern, which is really cool. So if you're buying HCX Enterprise and you're adding it into the mix, you don't have to think about it just going into Azure. You could think about it going to a separate colo site if you still have one, right? Those are starting to go away too as cloud becomes more pronounced, but it's still an option, right? So HCX can be part of the site pairing and disaster recovery, which means high availability will follow your app around regardless of any disasters or user errors or equipment failure. You've got, parallel VM migration threads, which helps speed up the process and helps it feel less single-threaded related to migration. That helps, and that's across the wire, right? So, and then HCX does not require an IP address change. So this is where I was talking about if you have apps that cannot change their IP address, you can deploy HCX Enterprise and have that layer 2 network be stretched into Azure. There's some extra components you have to think about from kind of a planning perspective, but it's an option. And then HCX provides that secure proxy for vMotion and replication traffic that hopefully appeases folks that are a little bit more security minded, right? The idea of replication into Azure, it all being private, encrypted, et cetera, that's kind of a cool reality. Leaning on HCX, it provides that secure proxy. And this is the logical sort of flow here. So HCX Enterprise allows you to extend that layer 2 networking. So if this is a want, you'll just need to factor that into the deployment, right, related to the overall approach of moving your VMs out of your on-prem data center. So in order to set this up, global reach should be configured between the on-premises Azure VMware Solution SDDC express circuits and on-prem. So then all required ports should be open between on-prem and AVS, right? So a little bit of homework you have to factor in. You'll need one IP address for the HCX manager on-prem and a minimum of 2 IP addresses for the interconnect and network extension appliance. So again, there's some components that get deployed on-prem and some components that get deployed inside of Azure. The on-prem HCX interconnect and network extension appliances should be able to reach vCenter and ESXi infrastructure that gets deployed during the AVS onboarding or kind of the solution deployment, right? So to deploy the WAN interconnect appliance, in addition to the /22 CIDR networks, which I just dawned on me, I didn't talk about that. You need that in order to think about expanding your networking from on-prem into Azure. You'll need at least a /22. So in addition to that /22 CIDR network address block used for the SDDC deployment inside of Azure, you'll need another /29 block for HCX, right? So a little bit of homework, but anybody who's familiar with networking, right? Like Dwayne, I think you know how to do this in your sleep, right?
Yeah, that was a mouthful of networking right there.
So. Yeah, it dawned on me, like I have it in this as a speaking note, but I think I must have just glossed over. So yeah, in order to set up hybrid connectivity, you do need at least a /22 CIDR network address block. And then if you bring about HCX, you need an additional /29. So it's, I don't know. I always found those networking people that could do all of this stuff, like it was on the back of their hand, no issue, right? I always had to like sit and find those CIDR calculators. It was never one of my favorite areas to focus. I've learned a lot though, but it's not one of my fortes.
The nice thing about this, I think, ultimately is using this, the HCX is you're ultimately flattening your network infrastructure rather than adding additional layers to it, right? So, you're creating that flat network between the on-premise and the Azure VMware solution rather than having to have all these gateways. It's essentially almost like two-tiered VNets in a logical sense, right? So you're creating, with the express route, that high-speed connection that a VNet to VNet peer would be without any IP overlap or IP address translation.
Correct. And so, if you've got a savvy network engineer, they're probably going to want something like this because it's more of the work up front, but it's less of a headache over time, especially if you have to go fail back and forth between environments. They can keep the same IP address, no problem. So it's kind of a cool reality.
And like you stated before, having applications that have had embedded IP addresses that are pointed to databases for decades.
Yes, and nobody knows.
Trying to find the database engineer that configured it to begin with is going to be difficult. So keeping that all consistent is going to be helpful.
Yeah, and I mean, as you can really tell, we're building that boat for everybody to join, and it's the whole notion of this gives you time to unravel what that looks like, especially if the developer who built it originally isn't there anymore, right? Or maybe you've got a COTS app, right, that's not getting any cloud native development cycles. This gives you an opportunity to say, okay, we can move these legacy technologies into Azure. A little bit of homework we have to factor in, but it's a cool reality in the sense that, once you have all that homework done and you've got your pre-planning done, moving it over should be pretty seamless and straightforward. So we'll talk a little bit here about storage because vSAN gets deployed, right? So the vSAN storage itself, it's a fully configured all-flash vSAN storage, which is local to the cluster. So deduplication and compression are enabled on the vSAN data store by default, and there's at least one that gets deployed by the way of building on AVS, right? So 2 disk groups are created on each node of the vCenter cluster. So each disk group contains 1 cache disk and 3 capacity disks. So that hopefully sets the stage on some of the math involved on the storage front too, which, if your SAN administrators are looking at this like having anxiety, hey, your role's changing, it's fine. We're going to think about ways in which to bring you on board as well and get you up to speed so you don't have to be stuck in the weeds dealing with all of your LUNs and provisioning that and carving everything out. That'll be handled by way of the vSAN that gets deployed on the back end. We also offer data at rest encryption, scaling, and storage integration. So, data at rest, data in transit will be encrypted. We've got capacity for you to bring your own customer managed keys. So in the event you don't trust Microsoft, It's fine. Customers are at that point. But we have capacity now where you can bring your own customer managed keys into the mix, which is kind of cool. There are a couple of vSAN storage policies. So the policy is created on the vSphere cluster and it's applied to the vSAN data store. It determines how the VM storage objects are provisioned and allocated within the data store to guarantee the right level of service. So that's something you don't have to worry about related to planning your storage infrastructure, right? That's something that gets applied by the way of creating the AVS private cloud. The vSAN storage policy also defines the failures to tolerate, or FTT, and the failure tolerance method. So that kind of helps related to, you don't have to factor that in, right? It's already provided for you by way of deploying AVS. And then to maintain SLA, 25% spare capacity must be maintained on the vSAN data store. So that's one thing you'll have to be conscious of. And there's ways to think about setting up monitoring and alerting, and you could either bring something on-prem to help, or you could do a native integration with Azure Monitor, leaning on log analytics. But just note that the SLAs aren't supported during the it's public, not private, public preview. But note that once it gets to GA, which we suspect it's going to hit GA this year, you'll need to make sure that 25% spare capacity is sitting on the vSAN storage array within your private cloud. So next, we're moving into kind of the security and compliance pieces here. So, Dwayne has his CISSP, and God bless him. We'll just say that. No, no, I'm kidding. No, but so when we were talking about kind of tag teaming this, this is definitely his realm, right? And I think he'll be able to take the next couple of slides here and explain, kind of what we're trying to ease security-minded folks with as you move everything into Azure.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. Take a break, get a drink of water
Sure.
or something. So yeah, I mean, the great thing about this whole solution and about the having Azure and VMware together and building all, and how this is all built and put together, you probably have gleaned from what Shannon's talked about is it's bringing together like all of these great areas of the areas of your environment and bringing in then the addition of Azure into the environment. So when you look at this slide, you can see that the AVS security posture has those best practices of Azure, VMware, as well as anything that you have within your own private security services, all integrated in one defense in depth strategy. So, whether you're working with your VMware inherited security with encrypted vMotion and your VMware Identity Manager for role-based access control, and all your data encryption, your key management systems can all be integrated into the Azure inherited security and what they bring in terms of their certified data centers having integrated DDoS protection whenever you stand up any services, having that certified hardware and that certified environment. We'll talk more about compliances in a couple slides. And then if you have your different your patch management systems and your multi-factor authentication, your firewalls, those all integrate into this solution as well, giving you then those layers of that build that defense in depth in your security posture.
Cool. Also, I was going to say this: Microsoft has almost, like, it's a big company, and I think we have, I want to say it's like 3,500 global. And this is just passed around very casually, right? 3,500 global cybersecurity experts, and we've got quite a number of CISSPs on staff, and I think they're the ones that help make this be a better reality for our customers. But I wanted to at least mention that, mostly because I think folks forget that people at Microsoft hold different certs. There's people who have their CCIEs, and people have their what's the high level vCenter or VMware? I can't remember what it is. I can't remember what it is.
Yeah,
there's
VTSE or something like that.
It's something like that, right?
VTCE or
right. So it's
just that alphabet soup of acronyms, right? That we all have.
So it only makes sense that we've got a lot of CISSPs working for us as well.
Of course. So next, as we talk about the Azure environment and the Azure infrastructure, and think back to a few slides ago where Shannon was talking about that those areas of responsibility. And as you move to the public cloud, as you know, into the Azure cloud, you now are giving that responsibility of the physical data center obviously over to Microsoft. But the great thing about what Microsoft does with their data centers is they build that layer of security within all of their data centers. And you can see, you know, the graphic on this slide looks very similar to, you know, a defense in depth strategy for your entire data, your whole data security posture with, you know, perimeter security and all of that. Microsoft has that built into even just granularly into a data center where they have all their staff, all the locations are staffed 24/7 with appointment only, authorized personnel with metal detectors, security screening, biometric scanning. You know, it's like entering into a government building. And then once you get in there, if you pass all the parameters and all the jump points, then the location of every person within that data center is tracked with hundreds of security cameras. Every rack has a security camera on it. So if anybody is accessing that, there is archival video footage that will find you.
So mind your P's and Q's, right?
Exactly. Watch what you're doing. There was a video on the news last night of somebody within a Hampton Inn that distracted the managers and then grabbed money out of the cash register, but you got him clear as day on the video cameras. So you're being watched everywhere. So
Yeah.
And it is no different in a Microsoft Azure data center.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense.
So as we talk about now, you know, what we've talked about around the vSAN clusters and how, you know, data is protected then in the AVS architecture. You know, you need to think about, you know, how that's utilized again, very similarly to how an Azure storage account is handled within the Azure environment. Data is utilizing the same encryption standards where you have the data is encrypted at rest on the vSAN clusters, and you have the ability then to bring your own keys, use your own key management system. I didn't see it on the slide and I didn't hear you talk about it, but I'm assuming if you don't have your own key management system, you could utilize Azure Key Vault for bring your own key. Or if you want to trust Microsoft with the keys, and don't worry about key separation, you can do that as well. But best practices, obviously utilize a key management system. If you have one, you can utilize it and put your keys there, or Azure Key Vault's there to provide a little bit of that separation of duties as well. And then being that this solution essentially highly recommends, if not requires, an express route connection, you're providing that's providing a secure transmission channel between your Azure and your on-premise. And that is, as we stated before, having a flat network, just like the AVS solution is sitting on your on-premise data center.
Yep, correct.
And another great thing that I like to always talk about, and I'm glad this slide was put in here, is around compliances for, you know, global standards and regulations that Microsoft carries for all of their infrastructure and their data centers. They are a great point of entry for workloads that require these standards. So even if you're a organization that doesn't currently require these type of standards, like say HIPAA or PCI DSS, if you start to move towards that and you require those standards, the infrastructure and the physical infrastructure of the Azure environment and the controls that Azure has in place, as well as the controls that are available in various services, have the ability to get you there in a much short order than building it out in your own data center. And that's one of the great benefits of utilizing Azure, is it has just about any type of protection, security, or privacy standard within their controls within their standard infrastructure, such as, the ISO standards that are listed here, GDPR, SOC 1, SOC 2. We mentioned some US standards here like FedRAMP. NIST isn't on this graphic, but utilizing the Azure infrastructure as well as then using like Azure Policy and Azure Security Center for monitoring and putting policies and initiatives in place to audit your environment helps get you in a good place that you may have everything you need in place and all the controls that you can stand up within your environment prior to an auditor showing up and marking you down and getting out the red marker saying, hey, you're not good here. Here's my invoice for my time. Why don't you call me when you get it fixed?
Right.
Azure Security Center is a great tool that you can now utilize, utilizing and bringing services into Azure, as well as what we mentioned before in terms of even utilizing some of the Azure monitoring Azure Monitor and Log Analytics tools that feed into Azure Security Center that can be used for on-premise workloads, show you where you stand on controls for these various compliance standards.
Yeah. And this will also evolve too. This is just everything that will be certified by general availability.
Yep.
Walk through a quick demo. Obviously, demos are tough for us right now because these are dedicated nodes, so they're going to be quick videos here. The first one surrounds onboarding. So notice how simple it is, right? You're going into the portal. You're clicking on the existing resource group. You're giving it a name. And right now, the only SKU that's around is the AB36 node. Given the fact there's a dropdown, that should change at some point. So you provide the vCenter admin password, the NSXT manager password. I wish all upgrades were like this, or I wish all deployments were like this, because gosh, I probably would have been much happier earlier on in life, right? Review and create, it goes through the last validation, and then you hit create. Think about what that used to look like.
Even just like a Windows operating system upgrade. Don't you wish that like before you actually deployed it and waited for an hour for this to happen and fail, that it would validate that it was ready to go, right?
Yeah, totally. And it's a crazy reality. Even deployment of regular infrastructure is so much faster when you lean on cloud and RESTful APIs. This demo is showing the HCX migration path. And so it took a little bit here to load. And the idea here is it's the guy who's recording this is saying, look, here's the IP address of this VM. It's living in the East US deployment. So notice that over there on the far left, he's going to select the HCX actions. You're going to migrate it to the target site. Now we have one deployed in East US and one deployed inside of West US, I guess it's West US. And then notice how we're placing that in the demo VM. So I think West US is live or close to live. It wasn't at one point. And then you can specify you want it to be vMotion. You saw there, though, you could also have it be bulk migration. You click on finish. There's a little bit of an error there, but he was able to get it going. Now he'll flip over to the vCenter side. You'll see this process get kicked off. I don't know if this is sped up. I need to find the guy who recorded this and figure out if it is, because it happens pretty quickly. But it is leaning on the Microsoft backbone, so it should be in theory faster. And then now it's living in the West. Oh, sorry, it's West. Yeah, so it's West Europe. EU is Europe. And notice how it's the same IP address as well. So what we've got deployed here is HCX Enterprise. We've stretched that logical layer 2 network from East US to West Europe. My apologies. Clearly I'm not wearing my glasses today. I probably should have. And so that shows you how easy it is to think about a migration path using vMotion and HCX Enterprise. So it's a really cool reality if you're struggling with how to make use of a digital transformation, kind of getting yourself that version 1.0 into Azure.
Seems easy, right?
Yeah. So then, how can you take action? Well, this is what I can arm you with, right? So the documentation shows up here. I have found that these aka.ms links are so much easier to memorize than the actual where do I go to go get the most updated info. This will take you to the overview, the new landing ground for all of the version 2.0 documentation. From there, if you are closely aligned with a Microsoft account team, get a hold of them, right? They will work with we call them the global black belts. They're highly specialized technical resources that are helping the process of onboarding customers during this public preview and even after GA, right? That's their whole charter related to that specific side of the org. They are hand-holding and getting the field ready to handle what these migration patterns look like. And that's not to say that, the field can't handle it. There's a closer tie with engineering with the global black belts. They have direct ties with engineering and they can get answers a little faster at this point because we want this solution to be successful, right? And I mean, everybody thinks that we're trying to get folks to move off of VMware and onto something else. Sure, if that's what your customer or if that's what you want to do as a company, we can definitely think about that. We also just want to be the cloud vendor that you can think about, running VMware workloads on. So if you're happy with the service, we want to make sure you're happy with the service. And if you run into weird nuances or caveats, we want to make sure that those folks are flagging that with engineering. And so right now, that's the way we've positioned it. It's kind of a white glove private preview. From there, you can start a trial. So you can, register for the preview with your account team. You'll get those global black belts. They'll probably do the demo and help you do the onboarding. And then, make sure that you're successful as you embrace this platform. I also highlighted additional resources, right? So there's an FAQ page, there's an overview, there's documentation. That's also in the earlier slide too. Just people, they embrace documentation and information very differently. If this is the slide you like, keep this slide and I think, everybody at Opsgilly or everybody at SkillMeUp has this as a slide deck in their world now, so they should hopefully be sharing it with you. And then you'll also see the additional offerings called out as well, which is kind of a cool reality. So yeah, and then that mechanics video is unfortunately still Cloud Simple, but it also showcases how easy it is to think about doing HCX migrations with vMotion. And that's all I've got. So we'll go through the summary here. We went through the background. We talked about the service. I walked through the whole notion of deployment, the management sides of AVS. I talked a little bit about the networking architecture, the things you have to factor in, what the migration scenario looks like, talked about the storage and the vSAN components. Dwayne delved into the security and compliance realm, which is always appreciated. That's not my background, although I've had a lot of security conversations with customers as a result of everybody now knowing a lot about a lot of things. And then showcasing some of the demo features that we've got, how easy it is to seamlessly migrate a VM from one AVS instance to another. Obviously, that migration pattern would be very similar if it was your on-prem environment into AVS, and then how easy it is to spin up an AVS cluster. I don't know about you, but when I watched that demo, my mind kind of blew up a little bit. Like, I wish it was easier 10 to 15 years ago. It would have saved a lot of headaches, heartburn, et cetera, right? And then armed you with some resources as well.
Sounds good. And what I'll do on those resource links is I will share those in the SkillMeUp community.
Cool.
In the CloudMaker Teams channel. So anybody that is on this meeting right now or listens to this meeting can go into that community site, and what I'll do is I'll just put it up in the files so that all the hyperlinks are there. I'll just create a PDF of this slide so that everybody has clickable links right on that slide. So
cool. Yeah, and then if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out. Feel free to follow me on Twitter and connect with me on LinkedIn, or write me an email. I always appreciate that. I feel like that's not as often the realm that most folks choose to use, but you're able to do that, though. Don't feel like you're a bother. I think that's everything.
Yeah.
So.
Sounds great. I appreciate your time today, Shannon.
Certainly.
It was fun.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. I appreciate it.
All right. I don't see any Q&A in the chat, so and we've gone long. We enjoyed this way. Enjoyed this too much, but
that's okay. That's okay. I always appreciate the ones that go long because it feels like there's a good dialogue to be had, right?
Yep. So I will end this session, and we'll have and you have yourself a great day. And everybody, I hope you learned something new about Azure VMware solutions, and just this new way, once this becomes GA, to start your evolution and migration into the Azure environment. Yeah. So thanks a lot, Shannon.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks.
Have a great day.
All right, you too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.